Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Eva Jackson, and I'm Managing Director with ICLEI Canada. And I'm very excited to be presenting on some of our work for all of you, and hope that it is valuable in the way of sharing our experiences with helping local governments to take climate action, and we do that through capacity building. So you'll see that theme interwoven through what I'm sharing with each of you today. And I'm looking forward to the meeting on the 23rd to take any questions or to have a discussion around how what we have done could be shared and applied more broadly. Perhaps before I start, I'll just take a few minutes to share a little bit about our organization, ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability. We were founded in 1990 at a convening of approximately 200 local governments who came together to take action on then Local Agenda 21. And we were founded as the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, ICLEI. However, in the early 2000s, we rebranded as ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability to look at sustainability issues more broadly. Our organization can be described in these three themes of an association. We're an association of local governments. We work with approximately 1,500 local governments around the world. I'm based in Canada and am managing director of our Canadian office. However, we have offices throughout the world, 17 in total, in Europe and Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia, China, Japan, Latin America, the US, to name but a few. We are a movement, and that movement is run through programs, and those programs vary on all sorts of fields: climate change mitigation, so the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and a transition to a low carbon economy, climate change adaptation, which I'll be speaking about our work in that area, sustainable procurement, biodiversity, all sorts of fields that come together to inform sustainability broadly. And lastly, we consider ourselves an agency that provides tools and resources to our local government members and partners and project participants to assist them in the tasks that they achieve. And really, our capacity building work is a function of all three of those as they get woven together. So for zeroing in a little bit on our adaptation work, in Canada in 2007, I suppose, is when we started our adaptation journey, and when we started working with local governments around adaptation. That was with support from the Government of Canada, then through Natural Resources Canada, to establish a program that would assist local governments in starting to think about how to respond to climate change impacts and how to define those locally. So BARC, or Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities, is our flagship adaptation program. It is run nationally across the country and is delivered both in English and French. And we assist communities in all areas of adaptation planning, from convening their local partners and stakeholders in their municipalities through to understanding climate science. And we lean strongly on our federal partners now with that, on identifying impacts, assessing vulnerability and risk, developing plans, implementing them, and then getting into monitoring and evaluation. So starting to think about what kind of indicators or other performance metrics they could use to understand whether the actions they're taking are having the desired response and or how they may need to course correct. We offer hands-on technical support through our staff in 3 offices, and we develop many tools and guidance documents to help them in the efforts related to those tasks. So really, you could consider BARC is our platform, as it were, and it takes different forms depending on how we deliver it. And that delivery can happen in many ways. It happens through multi-party projects that are funded by provincial governments, federal government departments, and sometimes foundations. And really at the core of BARC is a milestone approach, which sees 5 milestones or steps to advance action in that space. And you can see in the list of planning topics, the way that journey can unfold. This is just a snapshot of some of our results in having delivered this program formally since 2012. In 2010, the predecessor program of BARC was launched, which we called rather creatively the Adaptation Initiative. And then that morphed into the BARC program in 2012. But our community partners have identified over 1,000 unique climate impacts. They've identified nearly, well, this number is probably a little bit dated. It's from our impact report last year. So over 2,000 adaptation actions to respond to those impacts. They've worked with 75, or the program has worked with 75 institutional collaborators. And again, those range from provincial governments and their ministries to federal government departments, academic partners, private sector partners, nonprofit partners. The idea here is that diversity to help advance adaptation together. And we've been blessed to have worked with over 50 funding partners to support that work. One of the quintessential elements of BARC, which I'd like to spend a little bit of time on, and these are really, they're not formally labeled as our guiding principles, but really we see them as driving our work. And one of those is that BARC is meant to be locally relevant. It's meant to seize and take advantage of local experts and local stakeholders and local partners to identify how weather has already impacted their communities. And then after the provision of local climate science, to help understand what that science means for their community. The way we interpret this is that the local climate science, for example, it's like in a coloring book. The local climate science shows you the picture, and it gives you the black outline of a scene, irrespective of what that scene might be. And then it's that local flavor, the expertise of the people who live in that community, who work in that community, where their kids go to school, who understand what is physically there, the roads and bridges and pipes and wires, the softer elements of who is there, whether it's an elderly community predominantly with an older population that has a high population of new immigrants to that community. All those pieces that are locally derived are the color on that picture. So again, if that climate science is the outline, that local information is the coloring that really brings that science to life, to understand what does this mean for me in the city of Toronto, for my colleagues in the city of Victoria, and elsewhere. Thinking ahead, the other principle that drives our work is building capacity within the local government, so that once myself and my staff are done working with a community, we've elevated the level of discourse around adaptation in that community. So we've not simply given information, we've really worked to help build the capacity of staff to understand what to do with that information and how that information is locally relevant and how it can be applied to that local context. So after we are done, those municipal staff then are seen as climate change adaptation experts and can really drive that forward. As I mentioned, BARC is really our platform that we operate with local, on the issue of adaptation with local governments on. And that platform uses a peer cohort model where it's not just our staff working one-on-one with municipalities, but they're interwoven, and those municipalities start to work more effectively together. And so peers are working with peers and answering questions of, oh, we have this question, and can you help me think about how you could address this in your community? And so instead of a hub with spokes, it's more of an interwoven web. And that we found can work really well, particularly when municipalities are grouped by a common issue or a common geography or common demographics, etc. And so we try to apply that through that work. And the last element is technical support is part of the platform. And I mentioned earlier, we don't just give a resource, but really work with how to apply that resource locally and help overcome the hurdles in applying that resource locally. And we found by building that into the platform, it really enhances how the platform is used, and the platform in this space being a conceptual one, not necessarily an online platform that people are logging in. But we do have an online tool that our BARC community uses to document and transfer knowledge that is derived. So what have we learned in doing this work that I'm keen to share with all of you? One, that flexibility and customizability is immeasurably important. Trying to identify a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really lead to success in any community. And so being able to tailor perhaps what the entry point into adaptation is. And for some, it might be considering the hard engineered assets in their community. For others, it might be accessing climate change through health and an analysis of health and vulnerability as related to a changing climate. So really trying to understand what that entry point is one way that we offer flexibility. We offer methodological flexibility in terms of vulnerability and risk assessment, while at the same time maintaining rigor on what we consider constitutes good adaptation and good assessment that leads to good adaptation. I've already spoken about peer-to-peer learning and in-person meetings. In the era of COVID, this has certainly stymied some of our work, but we're finding creative ways to communicate digitally with our partners to advance that work as well. There are numerous and very clear benefits of collaboration to be had, and collaboration in the sense both from that spider web that I mentioned earlier, but as well collaboration locally. So not seeing the municipality as the holder of the pencil that does all the work, but really seeing them as a convener of a local process that involves council and staff, academic partners, health partners, watershed planning councils and watershed groups, business partners, and other nonprofit partners who together collaboratively co-produce information that includes their various expertise. So the climate change expertise comes from our organization, and that local flavor comes from all those local partners. There's others that are listed here that, of course, I'm happy to discuss on Wednesday's call, but the only other one I'd really like to focus on just for a moment is this concept of multi-solving to achieve multiple benefits. We know climate change is a wicked problem that is entangled into all sorts of issues, from behavioral psychology to engineering and the physics of the way our engineered assets operate. And one of the things that we believe is we need to be able to create solutions that achieve multiple benefits. So yes, a solution that moves water from where it is coming in, to where it should be displaced to, but at the same time that can improve quality of life or reduce sensitivity for one group. So really trying to think about solutions that achieve multiple benefits with the dollars that are invested into them. And one way to do that is to find synergies across the municipality. And if one department is already looking at planting trees to increase shade, and to increase tree canopy cover for other reasons, making sure that we're thinking about the most appropriate species for the changing climate, thinking about, are we planting these trees in areas that may typically not have a lot of green space, so less affluent areas in our communities, these trees then can increase the quality of life for the people who live there. So that concept of multi-solving is one that we are very much trying to uphold. Again, this idea of creating a platform, not necessarily a physical one, but a physical one as well, where people can exchange and share knowledge, is crucial for our work. Keeping your work nestled or nested within a timeline approach. One of the things our staff do quite regularly is when we're working with a group of municipalities, we schedule monthly check-in calls where we can say, you know, what's happened over the last month? What are you struggling with? Who have you engaged? Let's try to strategize how best to engage those folks and keep that momentum going and keep things moving forward so that climate change doesn't fall on the back burner and kind of fall down the list of priorities too far. And setting out monitoring, measuring plans early is another piece that for us is quite vital, because one of the things that councils, so mayors and other elected officials, typically ask is this a good investment? And if you can have indicators or other performance metrics that will show that these actions are having the intended effects and are helping to reduce risk, that sets the stage and tees things up for more adaptation to happen. So in thinking ahead, you know, from our perspective, what do municipalities need? And this really is kind of an assortment or mishmash of reflections from years of working in the climate change adaptation space with municipalities that I was asked to share with you. So clearly access to data is crucial. And this is where Canada has made huge gains and strides through the work of Lo and her team at the Canadian Centre for Climate Services, and as well as other institutes across the country. That data is necessary to make informed decisions. And what we're seeing is our role can now fill the space of extension agent to help make sure that the right data is being used for the right decisions by the right individuals. And that's a space we're quite happy to fill. One thing that we'd like to see, and this is slowly happening, is more of a focus on supporting implementation and those communities of practice or peer groups around implementation. There are innumerous resources that support vulnerability and risk assessment, and even the development of adaptation plans or the integration of adaptation into other municipal decision making. One of the things that we think is lacking is support on implementation, on support on how to bring those plans to life and how to fund and maintain funding and maintain momentum for the delivery of that work. And we've seen some really good examples of this, and I'm happy to share some of those on Wednesday. But that's one thing that we think is needed, because a country with, you know, 2,000 plans created by the 3,000 municipalities in Canada isn't going to be better prepared. It'll better understand what it should do to prepare, but without the implementation, without those shovels in the ground doing that work and the behavior change that's required, we won't be any better prepared for more extreme weather, hotter days, hotter nights, etc. On that, the municipalities need funding and programs and processes that have streamlined application and streamlined reporting requirements. Too often, I think for local governments, accessing this type of information and programs can be seen as a hurdle just to get access to the program, let alone to do something with that. So things that are streamlined and easy to use, that can be answered through a phone call, I think are all very effective. Support on community engagement. One of the core tenets of all of our work is that collaboration that I spoke about and that co-production. So supporting municipalities and local governments on how to do that effectively, I think, is a huge element. So when speaking about climate science and climate data, giving local governments the tools about how to engage their stakeholders and their partners on that data, I think is very important. Support in developing long-term financing mechanisms. Over the last 3 to 5 years, we've been very lucky, and there has been funding available to seize adaptation action. Now, this is generally ad hoc funding, where one applies, it goes through some scrutiny to determine eligibility, etc., and merit, and then there are some who are awarded the funding and others who are not. One of the challenges with that is it takes a lot of time to create these applications, and they may or may not be successful. So support in developing long-term and local financing mechanisms is something that I think is missing, and would be very well received by local governments. And lastly, a focus on climate equity, and again, achieving multiple benefits through climate investment. As we know, climate change impacts are not equal for all people. Vulnerability to those impacts is socially determined. Income, social status, access to social support networks, education and literacy, gender, culture, these all come into play. So really focusing on the interplay between those issues and climate impacts, I think, is very important for local governments, as the investments they make into adaptation can at the same time bring about improvements in income and social status, in social support networks, in strengthening education and literacy. And while this isn't necessarily going to be the shift of all adaptation work, and shouldn't be the shift of all adaptation work, that lens of climate equity should be applied to all adaptation interventions that are implemented. So that was quite quick, and just some reflections from our position as an organization that for the last 10 plus years has been working directly with local governments. To date, approximately about 100 of those local governments that we've worked on adaptation with. And I'm so looking forward to the opportunity to have a discussion around some of these issues and answer any questions and share some of the things that we've learned. Thank you so much for your time.